Well, hello and happy Thanksgiving. Yes, it was last week. So hopefully you're all stuffed. Your heart is filled with joy and thanksgiving, and you've been praising the Lord for all the great things He has done. As we begin the Christmas season, December is right around the corner. I am going to read out of the book of Luke. I want to emphasize that at this time of the year, I love to read that book because it reminds us of the Christmas story, and it causes our hearts to meditate on the great things that God has done. This is the birth of His Son, and today we're going to start in chapter 1, and we're going to precede the birth of Christ here with the birth of His cousin, John the Baptist, and we're going to focus on Zechariah, his heart, and his encounter with Gabriel the angel. We're going to begin in verse 8. Here we go. Once when Zechariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot according to the custom of the priesthood to go into the temple and to burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were outside praying. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zechariah saw him, he was startled and he was gripped with fear. I think I would have been afraid myself. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard." What prayer? Did Zechariah even remember what prayer he was referring to? He was probably so afraid, didn't remember what he prayed to God for. "Do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to give him the name John." So the promise. See, this prayer that you've been asking God about and wondering if it was coming, God is going to give that gift to you. That answered prayer is coming, and God keeps His promises. He will be a joy and a delight for you. So not only is He coming, God begins to describe that this child is going to be a joy to you. Yes, Zechariah, to you and your wife Elizabeth. Many will rejoice over his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine, and he gives him all these details of what this child is to do and not do in the strength that he will come in. Remember, he will be the forerunner to Jesus Christ, actually the cousin of Jesus. In verse 18, Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this?" And this is the question for today. When we are calling out to God and we are asking God in the midst of our Thanksgiving for petitions, and we're calling out, "God, can you do this for me? God, help me this. Go, give me direction. Show me, Lord. Unveil your work for me. Tell me what I'm supposed to do with my life." Or maybe we're having issues at work and we're crying out, "Lord, are you going to deliver me? Are you going to get me out of this mess?" Or there's family dynamics that are perhaps not the best, some dysfunction of some type, and you're crying out to God. Sometimes we forget that we've cried out to God for intervention. God never forgets because God is forever listening. And here is God answering Zechariah's prayer. And I wondered if he remembered what the prayer was. Because sometimes there's a lot of things that we're just spewing out to God. But I believe that this child was for sure something that he would have remembered. But maybe the question for Zechariah is when he says, how can I be sure of this? I'm an old man and my wife is well along in years. That's what he's concerned about? I'm old. He's speaking to Gabriel. I'm old. Am I going to have enough energy for this child, this toddler? It's going to be running around. My wife and I, we're old now. Now you're answering the prayer? Sometimes we think that God's timing is off, but it really isn't. Not only will this child grow up in this household of Zechariah and Elizabeth, but he is the forerunner to Jesus Christ. God uses him mightily, mightily. John the Baptist will be used to just glorify God and to do the purposes that God has put him on this earth to do. Came out of the desire of Elizabeth and Zechariah to have a child, and God answers that prayer. So it doesn't matter how old we are. It doesn't matter the circumstances, what they look like. Sometimes we look and it doesn't equate. It doesn't seem like God could possibly answer it, at least not the way we're thinking, because the resources are not there. How is God going to change this situation? God is not limited by time. He's not even limited by how old we are, what resources we have. He's not even limited by our own fear. Zechariah becomes mute and he's no longer able to speak until this promise comes to pass for his unbelief. And I just want to make sure that we, as we are waiting for God to answer the promises, that we will exercise faith. Because sometimes fear can grip us, and we don't want to be silent. And it may not be just like Zechariah where he was mute, But sometimes because the promises of God or what we think needs to happen and our prayers are not being answered, sometimes we become so discouraged to the point that it silences our time of worship with God. We find nothing to be thankful for. We find no reason to worship God. And that is a silence that the enemy will love to just launch on us and mute us. So in the midst of the wait, in the midst of the waiting, as we're calling out to God for whatever it is that you're waiting on, we are to worship God in the midst of it. So that fear won't come in and reside in us and blanket us and silence us. So exercise faith is what the Lord was telling me today. In the midst of whatever we're waiting for and whatever Liz is waiting for, exercise faith because God is good. You know, yesterday in the midst of worship, I was at church, and I know that I began to pray in the Spirit, and it just really just edified my own soul. And I was listening to a different preacher today on television, and he was talking exactly about that. That sometimes in the midst of when we use our prayer language, you know, it's just really a way to edify ourselves. So in the midst of worship, as I was calling out to God on Sunday, I felt, you know, God's presence because my own body, my own soul was being edified with the language that He gave me. So worship God, worship Him in your prayer language, worship Him in whatever language you speak. Call upon God. Let your body worship God. You know, hands lifted up, you know, head bowed, on the floor, prostrate, in dance, in laughter, whatever it is. Because God's promises, He comes through. He comes through with those promises, and the things that we ask for Him in the midst of prayer, He doesn't forget. He didn't forget about Zechariah. He didn't forget about Elizabeth, and He used them, the parents, mightily. And He used the gift that He gave him even in a mightier way, the forerunner to Jesus Christ. So whatever you're waiting for, continue to worship God through it. Don't let your tongue be silenced. Don't let your atmosphere be quenched, but fill it with worship unto God, because God keeps His promises and He does hear our prayers. Well, Merry Christmas. This is the season of joy. May your heart be filled with joy as you see God unveiling and answering your prayers. Glory to Jesus. Bye-bye for now.